Are you looking to play the Benko Gambit? Do you want to see two masters battling it out in the Benko? Stay tuned. Alright, I'm playing the black pieces here against FIDE Master George Kane. This is back in 2014, and this is an unrated league game that we had. So the game starts out in a Benko, and George accepts the pawn, accepts the second pawn, and here I play g6. And this is all pretty standard theory, so there's a line here where white plays e4, allowing the trade on f1. So I go for it. Play d6, this prevents any sort of early e5 pushes. King g1, this was sort of a new move to me. I think usually you'll see the f-pawn push up or the g-pawn push, but George is playing king g1 followed by king to h2. And this is kind of your typical Benko pressure already. So if we do a pawn count, we see that white has an extra pawn. There's a and b pawns for white, for the c pawn for black. But this c pawn is very solid. The a and b pawns can protect each other, but they could also be attacked by the black pieces. So look at this Benko pressure. We have the bishop on g7 pointing at the pawn on b2. We have the rook on a8 pointing at the pawn on a2. We have the f6 knight attacking the e4 pawn. And what we would like to do is move this b knight out of the way and get the other rook over to the b file to apply even more pressure and probably bring the queen out to a5. So in the Benko, even though you're gambiting a pawn, it's not your typical gambit where you go for an attack against the opponent's king. It's a positional gambit. You actually are playing for the initiative, and you get a ton of pressure against your opponent's queen side. And I've only beat a couple of FIDE Masters in my life, and two of them were using the Benko Gambit. So in the next video, I'm going to show another game where I beat a FIDE Master with the Benko. Keep in mind, at the time I wasn't even a national master. I was an expert. So here I played knight f to d7, kind of increasing this pressure down the diagonal. Knight b to d7 I think would have been a good move here as well, maybe even stronger. King h2. Now knight to e5. So what I'm doing here is I'm offering a trade of these knights to help open up the g7 bishop. Also, I may end up playing a move like pawn to f5 later to open up my rook, or pawn to e6 to undermine these center pawns. So this is a typical idea in the Benko, and sometimes you see that this f6 knight will actually go through g4 and back to e5 to trade off a pair of knights. But here there's this pawn on h3. And I think that's why I like knight f to d7, because I knew those lines, knight g4 and knight comes back. So here I figured, well, I'm going to try it with knight f d7 and knight e5. So here my opponent declines the trade knight to e1, and this is a small mistake. So I think he should take on e5, because after knight e1, now look at the imbalance of these knights. My knight's a really good piece here. So here I played knight b to d7. Now let's say white wants to get aggressive with f4. This knight can come over to c4, and look what it's doing, putting more pressure on the b2 pawn in combination with this bishop. So really the Benko is all about applying pressure. And I think that's why, like, for me, the Benko was very natural feeling, because I like playing for the initiative and I like creating threats. It's a very low risk way to create threats. Low risk in the sense that you're not going to be attacked real quickly. But there is the risk, I guess, of always just being down a pawn, and that's happened to me before too. Queen e2. Knight to b6. So now what I'm thinking is this knight may end up going to a4, offering a trade of these two knights. Another weird thing with the Benko, and something to keep in mind, is oftentimes the trades of the minor pieces favor black. Even though you're down a pawn, what it'll do is it'll increase the pressure that your rooks can have on the open files, because obviously a rook is not going to really pressure a pawn defended by a minor piece, unless you're willing to sacrifice. So here I retreat. Now knight to a4. Starting to chip away at the defenses of these pawns, trying to increase my pressure. Queen c2 and queen out to a5. So look at this, I'm offering the queen trade. And here white should capture the knight according to Stockfish and then play b3. So he could use this idea that the queen's being attacked to help free this rook in the corner, bishop b2. That would have been a really nice way for white to neutralize my pressure. So here I made a mistake. Instead of queen a5, I should have taken on c3 and transitioned this way. And here Stockfish is already saying that black has a small edge. Bishop b2 does not work so well because of queen a4. And if the queens trade, this is a really strong position for black. Black has all the play. And Stockfish is already saying 2.6 pawn advantage. I mean, kind of black has their choice. Which pawn do you want to take? This pawn's pinned down. When e4 drops, a lot of times d5 also drops. So 2.6 pawn advantage for black. Alright, so I made a mistake. My opponent made a mistake in return. Now I took on c3. And again, Stockfish is complaining, saying c4 would be a better move, followed by bringing that knight back to c5. So, very complicated position. Supposedly a4 is the best move here by white, which gives white a big advantage. But it's very hard to understand. Like, if you can get the a4 pawn here safely, it's a good square, but you have to leave that knight for a move, and it just feels strange. So after this trade, I offer the queen trade again. Opponent declines. And now look at how all of these pieces are well placed for black. And this knight is just waiting to come into the game. So here he comes, knight f6. My opponent plays c4, cutting off the queen from attacking this pawn. Rook to b2. So I'm going for activity here. I'm trying to get all of my pieces active, increase pressure. I'm still down one pawn. Rook a to b1, e5, good move by white. And now I'm looking to play active. Knight h5, hitting this pawn. White trades and plays queen to e4. So according to the engine here, position's still even. And the move I play, queen to a3, it's very subtle. I could play rook takes a2, but I don't want rook takes a2. I want to just sit on this position a little bit and say, okay, white, it's up to you to find a move. It's up to you to find a plan. And I had this small little threat. Rook takes g2 check. King takes g2. Queen b2 check as a way to open up the white king. Because I figure if I can get rook takes g2 check and then win both of these with the white king out in the open, maybe I can create some tactics there. So here my opponent should play either rook to b1, offering the trade again, getting rid of that tactic, or e takes d, and then rook b1. He plays f5. It's a very small mistake, about half a pawn. I do rook takes g2, check, and here my opponent makes a blunder. Knight d2. I know what he was thinking. Knight d2 makes sense if queen takes a1, but I don't have to take a1. I take the knight. And this is something that I really like about the Benko too. There's a lot of lines where maybe you sacrifice a piece for two pawns after you're already down the pawn, or maybe you sacrifice the exchange, but you're doing it all for the initiative and activity. So that's exactly what's happening here. I'm going for the initiative and activity. So king g1, knight to f4, threatening knight takes h3 check. Sorry, king g1, knight f4, now king f1. I take h3, threatening queen f2 mate. White blocks, I bring the queen back, threatening queen g1 mate. And now look at this, I'm grabbing this pawn for free. Knight f4 check. Now knight to d3, hitting the queen. Also threatening queen takes d5 check. If this gets played, knight takes e5 check. So it's like all the pawns are dropping for free. Pawn after pawn after pawn. There's mate threats. There's fork threats. Could fork the rook in the corner. The stockfish eval is after knight to d3 -7. So really there's no moves at all for white to save themselves. And here my opponent George just resigned the game. He didn't want any more of this attack. All the pawns are dropping. There's too many tactics to look at. He knew it was over. So this was a Benko Gambit played back in 2014 in an unrated league game. But it was 90 minutes on the clock each against a FIDE Master. So I was really happy with this game. One of my nicer Benko games. There were a couple kind of mistakes back and forth out of the opening. But it was also a very complicated position. So I think I'm going to do more videos on the Benko. I've really enjoyed playing it, and I have a lot of examples from the Benko. Also, I think in the future there might be a ChessGoals repertoire that's based on the Benko Gambit. But for now, we do have a repertoire that's being worked on for the Slav defense with d5, c6. And I'll put a card to the Slav defense up above. And if you guys like this video, please let me know in the comments if you want to see more Benko Gambit games analyzed. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. We have a goal of 1,000 subs by the end of the year. Hopefully we can get there. And please give the video a thumbs up as well if you like the content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.